Today it's time for fundamentals of car audio. That's right. And with that, let's go over here and click this. And we'll go to the laptop. What does a high preamp voltage do for you? One can only guess. First off, we need to understand basics of the path of sound. You have your output signal that comes from your source unit, and that's output, and inside of that signal is going to be a certain amount of noise. Then it goes through the amplifier, denoted by the gray box there, and you have a much bigger signal. You'll see the amplified signal. The red section in the middle is the amplified noise along with amplifier noise. So the amplifier is going to have a certain amount of noise that it is also going to create. Now keep in mind, not all of this noise is in the audible range, but it is there nonetheless. Amplifiers will amplify everything, including noise. That is something to keep in mind. So every piece you have in there is going to, so like if we add an EQ in here, then there'll be EQ noise, and then you're going to amplify that as well. So every step along the way, your noise is increasing because it's getting more and more. You're not going to have one lose its noise, so remember that. So now that we understand the basics of the path of sound, a few points about noise. All audio equipment has some amount of noise. All of it has noise. Now whether you can hear it or not is up to you. Deciding or dealing with that and deciding what is acceptable can be fun. Meaning at some point you have to decide, is the amount of noise it's creating worth the amount of effort I'm putting in to try to get rid of it, or can I even get rid of it? Is it too much noise for me to tolerate? Am I going to have to get better equipment? Give yourself a fighting chance if you are concerned about it. The better the equipment, the better your chances are. 100%. If you buy cheap, inexpensive equipment that doesn't have the proper filtering in it to help filter out the noise that is going to be there, you're going to have noise more so than you would with the better equipment. Not everyone's hearing is good enough to hear the difference. If you have to put your ear on the speaker to hear it, move on. There's only so much you can do. I can't tell you how many times I've had people that'll sit there and they'll be like, "Do you hear that?" I'll be like, "No, because I'm sitting here. It's 4 feet away from me. I'm never going to hear that." Okay? So if you're that person, then, whoa, you need to breathe a little bit. Alright, so now that we got the basics of all that in place, what does 2 volt look like? So if you have a standard radio that has a 2 volt preamp output, you have your amount of signal to the amount of noise. The red thing, just like on the previous, is the amount of noise. So that's what it is. The lower output from the source unit means a higher input gain on the amplifier. This means a higher amount of floor noise. Floor noise can also be called gain hiss. It is a hiss sound that increases when you turn up the gain to get to proper output. It can also be there at low gain depending on the equipment, and that kind of falls back into the cheaper equipment thing. The picture is showing you how the amplifier gain is set up from 6 volts to 1.8 volts. With the amount of a 2 volt signal, we have to turn the gain up quite a bit, and what you're going to see is that amount of signal to the amount of noise. The red is the amplifier gain, the red is noise introduced from the amplifier, and the red of course is just the doubling or tripling or quadrupling of the noise coming over the signal out of the radio. There again, this might be something that you don't even hear, it just depends on the equipment, but this is to give you a visual representation of what is actually happening. What does 4 volt look like? So now we have the same amount of noise coming out of the amplifier, but we have twice the amount of signal coming out. So twice the signal output, half the noise. This was Alpine's sales pitch for 4 volt. This is literally what they'd come in your store and say to sell the consumers on 4 volt. They also said it would be louder. That was not true, and I'll get to that in a second. The volume is the same as 2 volt. Max volume is max volume. The best feature is low gain to get to max volume, which means less noise. Now if we go back a slide and we look at the amount of signal, oh, not that, sorry. If we go back and we look at the amount of signal on a 2-volt system and the amount of signal on a 4-volt system, as you'll notice, the amount of signal there is the same. It doesn't matter what is going on, meaning 6 dBs or 5 dBs of gain overlap is 5 dBs of gain overlap. 0 dB is 0 dB. It's not like where a radio clips, it's always going to clip. Okay, so if we've got that amplifier set up to maximum sensitivity, and this is, if it's going to put out 75 watts, it's still going to try to put out 75 watts at 2 volts of input. You just have your gain open really far. And then if you have 4 volts of input, it's still only going to put out 75 watts. It's just now your gain, as you can see, going back to the other slide, your gain there is at like 1 o'clock, where your gain here is closer to 8:45. And then you'll notice that the amount of total noise has been reduced because we have way more signal. Therefore, we don't have to turn our gain up so sensitive, and we will actually have reduced amounts of floor noise. So the misconception is when you go to a 4-volt, everything is louder. It's not louder. It's the same 75 watts you're going to get, but your floor noise or your gain noise or your gain hiss is going to be definitely lower because our amplifier input sensitivity doesn't have to be turned up quite so high. So this would be the argument for the hotter preamp out voltage. Now, with that, a lot of people will ask, well, what about if I run, you know, the radio? We're not going to get into that because this is strictly RCA, because we need to understand how this works first before we can go deeper into the rabbit hole as far as that goes, because then we have to worry about distortion and clipping and all those other fun things. So with the preamp section, most good preamps will get you to about 95% of the volume knob. Some of them will do 100% of the volume knob. So we want to see what that looks like so that you understand why you want a 4-volt, what that means for your gain structure, and the noise that is going to be generated from it. So we got to see that here. 4-volt looks like this. 2-volt, noise. It's all about the noise and that gain hiss. Unless you're one of those guys that says, bro, man, my volume knob's on my gain. My gain is only halfway up. I could go so much further, man. Make it loud.
Make it loud.